What's up everybody, Coach Mills here, coming at you with a brand new Valorant video. In this video, we're going to be breaking down how to abuse the starter weapons for free wins. And the thing is, mastering these starter weapons are not only going to allow you to win the most important round in the game, which is the pistol round, but many of these really cheap weapons are actually incredibly powerful even in the later stages of the game. So we're going to break all that down, tell you exactly when to use these for some honestly really free value and wins, and do it at such a low cost. But speaking of lots of value for a low cost, go to the Game Leap website right now for constantly uploaded courses every single day, from in-depth mechanical guides to more advanced map guides, agent courses, and much more. Do yourself a favor, go check it out in the links down below. But without further ado, let's jump into the video. Now, the first weapon that we gotta break down is none other than the Ghost, which is one of the most forgiving weapons movement-wise in the game, period. Now, you can really utilize the fact that its movement is forgiving by really being fluid. Don't commit to any long-term tap fires. You don't need to crouch to convert on a lot of these kills. You can jiggle in and out of cover and make sure that your crosshair placement is perfectly head level. And the Ghost pistol is a very lethal weapon even in the later rounds, as long as you can connect on those heads. Now, typically you see this run in that first round often. However, it also could be a really powerful secondary, and you see this a lot when you try to upgrade in that second round. After you won that first round, you upgrade to something like a Bulldog, and you still have your sidearm, your Ghost pistol, as your secondary. Now, the reason that this is so powerful is, unlike something like a Bulldog or even a Vandal or a Guardian, you can spam through smokes without giving up your position, which is something that you should be actively doing on the Ghost. You can always switch to your other guns when you're actually going to be getting in a fight with enemies, but in the pre-fight stages, using that Ghost pistol to spam out enemies is going to get you some free damage and allow you to more easily convert on kills with whatever your primary weapon is. Now, on top of that, having this as a sidearm in the later rounds, which some players do, especially if they're at max money or it's the last round or whatever the case may be, can be really strong, because the Ghost, especially if you're not trying to hit headshots because the enemy is very weak, it is one of the easiest weapons to use. It's very forgiving, like I said, with movement, and you're almost guaranteed to hit shots on the enemy without a large margin of fail, unlike something like a Sheriff, which has a rather large margin of failure where it might not even get any damage on the enemy. And that's why the Ghost is very reliable, very consistent, and if the enemy is very weak, you might just want to swing around the corner with your Ghost instead of whatever AR you're using. Now, moving on to the next starter weapon that we have to break down is the Classic, and of course, it's free. So this is the one that you're going to have most often on your person, and how you're going to use it really depends on your range and your scenario. Now, the primary fire is not that great outside of those pistol rounds because it just doesn't do that much damage and its time to kill is too long. However, if you're from those further ranges that enemies are stationary, like they're diffusing, planting, or they just don't know you're there, then yeah, you can just use your primary fire, but the true power of the Classic is actually the alternate fire. Now, the alternate fire actually has the capability of one-shotting an enemy from max shields if you hit them in the head with all 3 pellets. Now, that's not going to be incredibly likely, and the number one mistake I see players do with the Classic pistol is right off the bat, if an enemy swings them, whether or not they're at 4 HP or whatever, they will instantly jump and try to right-click to finish off the enemy. And the problem with that is, unless you hit all 3 in that head right there, which is a very difficult shot and a large amount of RNG, you're going to just die before you could fire that second burst of 3 bullets. Now, if you're going in to finish off an enemy that's low, jumping can be amazing because it can mess up the crosshair placement of the enemy, and especially if you're pushing them. A lot of times in their mind, they're thinking, I need to hit this headshot, I need to hit this headshot, and that keeps repeating in their mind over and over again. But if you jump to get that last bit of damage in, even if they perfectly spray and they perfectly react to your swing, they're not going to have their crosshair at the appropriate level to headshot you before you trade out damage. And like I said, if they're low, you're going to win that duel. Now, to get them to that low point, a lot of times you want to be kiting around natural cover and using the fact that you can be mobile and still do damage to move and right click as you're moving and jiggling in and out of actual cover. You don't have to be stationary, and you don't want to be stationary, because the idea is you're trading a little bit of scrap damage here or there while making yourself really hard to hit, and then when the enemy doesn't or least expects it, you could push them with a jump right click to finish them off. And remember, if you get even 2 pellets in the body, you're going to be doing 52 damage, and add another pellet, it's going to add another 26 damage to that, and any headshot is going to do a whopping 78 damage from that really close range. So if you've damaged the enemy at all, honestly, a headshot and a body shot is just going to finish them flat out, win the matchup. Even up against better weapons and ARs, you can abuse some of the strengths of a Classic to still win the 1v1. Now moving on to the next weapon that we got for you on the list is the Shorty. And of course, the Shorty is just one of the most meta-defining weapons, and for only 200 credits, this weapon can pack a punch. No, not COD zombies. I'm talking about the Shorty that can really trade up in value. Now, this is one of the two starters that I wanted to talk about aren't really that good to buy in pistol round. You see, the Shorty is actually far better up against better guns because the risk versus reward is worth it. You're intentionally putting yourself in a disadvantaged scenario, or a scenario where the enemies might take a completely different site and you're stuck with retaking with the Shorty, but the reward is an enemy walks into you and you get a free kill, you get to take their gun, and all of a sudden a round that you should lose on paper is winnable. Now, as a general rule of thumb, make sure that when you're buying the Shorty, you pick up your classic again so that your classic doesn't despawn, because you never know if enemies are going to push the other site, and you would much rather re-enter another site with a classic rather than have a Shorty that's just not gonna ever be useful. You're never gonna set up the scenario to get enough damage in to get some value. Now, typically though, the Shorty is one of those weapons that's overwhelmingly better on D side, and you wanna be often playing an angle where enemies wanna challenge and they have to either push through a smoke and you can hold inside a smoke or just outside of one, or you hold in a close area somewhere like garage or a close cubby, where even if enemies check it, unless they pre-fire, all you have to do is react, shoot your shot, and just shut them down just like that and steal their gun. But remember, sometimes enemies come in pairs, so often it might be better for you to get that kill and then still reload past natural cover and not peek enemies, because they're gonna back up to try to challenge you if you peek again. But if you just don't peek again, they have to use utility, and then you can use either some LOS blocking ability or something like that to actually get out. Now, moving on to just using the Shorty as a sidearm, it can be incredibly powerful, especially on certain characters like Jet that can really utilize their mobility to get them in better positions. But in general, the Shorty can be a really powerful tool when enemies smoke you out. For instance, if you're using something like an operator and enemies smoke all around you, they push onto point, or you're even using a Vandal, for instance, and you don't want to just start fighting enemies, shooting them through smokes and potentially getting shot back at, you can go take space in a smoke with your Shorty. And because of how smokes work, any enemies that enter your smoke domain that you're holding with a Shorty, there is no way, unless you have the reaction time of my dead grandma, you're gonna lose this matchup. It doesn't matter what the enemy weapon is. Now, moving on to the next weapon that we gotta talk about on this list, it's the Frenzy. And the Frenzy is just a weapon that's seeing much more play in pro play. It's like all of a sudden everyone just woke up to how broken this gun is in the right hands. Now, the number one weakness of this 400 costed gun is the fact that it only has 9 bullets. However, in pistol round, this is actually still really powerful because Frenzy gives you longer range than a shotgun, more consistency to trade out kills, because a lot of times shotguns are feast or famine, right? They're not really good for trading out kills. They're good for either getting a kill or doing nothing and dying. And on top of that, the Frenzy is much better at destroying different types of utility, like Rain of Blind, the Sky Flashes, Sky Dog. I mean, all of Sky's abilities, if I'm being honest, and just other utility in general. The Frenzy is a lot better at dealing with that, and the Frenzy is much better for rush-based strategies, where if multiple teammates are pushing in with the Frenzy, you can often mow down the enemy team, always trade out with kills, always bring forth a consistent amount of value, and it's still fairly accurate even while moving if you're at that close range. Now, as far as using this as a secondary weapon, honestly, it's one of the ones that doesn't really scale that well into the later game. However, on certain characters, you can still get quite a bit of value, especially if you can somehow increase your fire rate, because it makes this thing basically an insta-kill. So Stim Beacon and Reyna's ultimate, these can be comparable things that can really turn a Frenzy into something that's really, really lethal, even up against armor. But in general, if the enemies are 1 HP, you can always just whip out the Frenzy and just push them like a madman, and you'll typically get the kill. Now, the last weapon that we gotta talk about is the Sheriff. And I talk a lot about feast or famine on this channel, but the Sheriff embodies that. It's a lot of, I'm going to shut down the enemy and just tap them in the head, get their gun, pop off, or I'm going to do absolutely nothing with the Sheriff, whip all my shots, or hit one body shot and die. Now, just like the Shorty, the Sheriff is one of those weapons that is just not that good on those pistol rounds, and is far better later in the game up against better guns, because abilities reign supreme in pistol round, first off, and second off, even if you have that Sheriff, an enemy could just be rocking a Ghost, which is far more forgiving and still one tap you in the head. So you need to understand that the Sheriff doesn't really give you that much value against what you're up against in pistol round, but up against things like ARs, you have the capability to potentially trade an 800 credit weapon up against someone who bought full armor and an AR and just dink them and just win that matchup. Now, honestly, the best way that you're gonna have value on the Sheriff is by holding angles consistently and punishing angles by pre-aiming angles that enemies are gonna peek from. A lot of players will try to swing with the Sheriff far too much, which can work. However, the Sheriff has to be the most unforgiving gun in the entire game for not perfectly having good counter strafing and crosshair placement, and it's going to be way more difficult to do that when you're swinging enemies rather than just holding an angle, waiting for someone to peek, and just reaction shooting them and shutting them down. This is why a lot of times your patience and your fundamentals are going to be heavily rewarded on the Sheriff, and I would highly suggest if you want to be able to force buy up to the Sheriff and clutch a lot of rounds that you really have no business winning, then definitely spend some time practicing the Sheriff in free-for-all. I know it's going to be brutal. I know you might just get shut down a lot, but eventually you're going to start hitting some shots, some flick shots that you just didn't think were possible, and if you can incorporate even a little bit of that into your games, you're going to win some rounds that you had no business winning. And honestly, every single one of these weapons are definitely worth putting some time and effort in practicing in up against bots and in the free-for-all game mode. But definitely go to the GameLeap.com website if you want in-depth tips and tricks on how to improve your mechanical skill right away. We got tons and tons of guides, so do so a favor, go check it out right now in the links down below. But thanks so much for coming by. That's all I got for you today. I'm Coach Mills, and of course, until next time,